While the Flash may be the fastest man alive, there are sometimes moments or battles that can't be won with pure speed, but most of the time they are still won with speed. Which makes for a happy ending, yes, but also a ridiculous story. So those moments that I missed are what we're exploring today. Let's do it. In its 10th Future Flash. While Savitar was introduced as the Future Flash in the show, the real Future Flash is very different in the comics. When Iris and Wally get into a car accident, Wally dies and Iris is paralyzed. Blaming himself for not being there, Barry ends up becoming a much darker hero. He kills Reverse Flash, Mirror Master, and Grodd before turning his attention on the past. The Speed Force has a tear in it, and Barry kills his younger self and uses the energy to seal it. Good Barry then ends up waking up in the Savage World, a place outside of time, and uses his intelligence to return to the normal world, and fights against his future self once again. The two then team up against a different villain who wants to use the Speed Force to destroy the world, and older Barry creates an explosion large enough to kill the villain, which was technically himself. Well, I guess like to kill the villain they were fighting as well as himself. A version of himself, the good version though, did end up surviving this, which is pretty nuts. And at 9, ELSEWORLDS. The ELSEWORLDS crossover event for the CW Arrowverse shows was certainly an interesting plot point for various characters. I mean, we saw Oliver Queen become the Flash and Barry Allen become the Green Arrow. However, it's surprising that they ended up actually living through this. That anyone survived this. Because a reality-altering book should really have caused a lot more damage than it did. I mean, they destroy the book and everything goes back to normal seemingly, but in my personal opinion, that's not how this should have worked, okay? The book, if it was really altering reality, would have made these changes permanent. And Deegan should have ended up thinking bigger than just swapping a couple people's identities and making the heroes the bad guys than making yourself the Superman of an Earth without a Superman. It seems like a load of wasted potential there. Even if you don't have good intentions, I think that there's a lot more that you could have done. And if this was real, nobody would ever recover from this, physically or financially. And it ain't getting powers back. When superheroes get their powers, it's usually a one and done thing. But it's always a good plot point to somehow lose them and then need to get them back, or at least the writers think so. This has happened multiple times with the Flash over the years, most notably in the FLASHPOINT timeline, where Barry didn't have his speed and turned to Thomas Wayne to help get them back. Barry was strapped to a wooden chair in a rainstorm surrounded by the chemicals he was around when he got his powers the first time, and then was struck by lightning. This left him with third-degree burns all over his body, so Wayne wrapped him up like a mummy in bandages, but luckily he got his powers back and was able to deal with those burns quickly. But it's honestly a real shock that this didn't kill him, considering how he got his powers from becoming the lightning bolt that struck him in the first place, and then the Speed Force choosing him and all that crap. But nevertheless, he got them back. And while it seems obvious, like of course he would, there is another version of this story. In the Dark Multiverse Flashpoint story, Barry Allen actually dies trying to get his powers back. Instead of getting his powers back, he gets third-degree burns and dies. So Eobard Thawne ends up claiming the title of the Flash and tries to stop the war between the Amazons and the Atlanteans by killing Arthur and threatening Diana. Obviously this doesn't go well, but it was possible for Barry to die. It just resulted in the darkest timeline. And it's 7, BLOODWORK. After saving Ralph from BLOODWORK, or Ramsey Rosso's blood, Barry saw his mother, who was really the Speed Force, at least on the show. She came to warn him that when he had saved Ralph's life through a blood transfusion, a small amount of Ramsey's blood was transferred into Barry, and now that blood was trying to bind Barry to Ramsey's will. Barry then found himself struggling between choosing the Speed Force or Ramsey trying to convince him that if he joins him, he will actually end up surviving Crisis and can have the life he always wanted, with Nora as his child and with Iris. The Speed Force was trying to convince him to not listen to Ramsey. Barry eventually seems to reject Ramsey, claiming that his lies were so convincing. However, the Speed Force told him that Ramsey wasn't lying. This causes Barry to get angry at the Speed Force, since he never had any choice of becoming the Flash. It had chosen him. And ever since then, he's been doing what the Speed Force wants. Then Barry wakes up at Star Labs, after Cisco and Frost found him lying on his apartment floor in pain. They determined that Ramsey's blood had found its way inside him, but now Barry claims to have beaten it. However, Iris noticed that Barry's acting strangely, and she quietly walks away and tells Cisco and Frost that it's not Barry. They walk slowly up to him and he turns around, now having a twisted face due to Ramsey's infection. He speeds away with Black Lightning and joins Ramsey, but later on it's revealed that he was double-crossing Ramsey. But realistically, he shouldn't have been able to, but oh well. Paragon of love, right? And it's 6, Blackest Night. Blackest Night involves Necron, a personified force of death who reanimates deceased superheroes and seeks to eliminate all life and emotion from the universe. Because, you know, that's every villain's goal. Jeff Johns has identified the series' central theme as emotion, and the crossover was published for 8 months as a limited series in both the Green Lantern and the Green Lantern core comic titles. However, the most befuddling thing was that all the heroes and villains who were raised from the dead somehow lost, despite their Black Lantern rings. Reverse Flash even ended up being brought back and fought against the Flash. During Blackest Night, Thawne's corpse returned as a member of the Black Lantern Corps, resurrected by his power ring. This version called himself the New Black Flash and immediately sought out the Flash and began tormenting him to feed on his emotions. This version was only the reanimated corpse of Zoom though, well, for lack of a better term, and did not have any memories from after his own death. It was not aware that an alternate version of Zoom had since appeared or that Flash had died and come back. Halfway through into number 5, CW Flashpoint. The CW Flashpoint is nothing like the Flashpoint we saw in the comics, aside from his mother being alive. This time around, Barry still has his speed, he just hasn't used it to become the Flash. Instead, he uses it to be creepy and steal something out of Iris's purse so that he can say she dropped it. This timeline gave Wally speed and made him Kid Flash, along with Edward Claris becoming the rival. But the main issue of this episode was going to be that Barry was losing his memories of the original timeline and, subsequently, his speed. As for how this wasn't instant, I don't know, but at the rate that it was going in the show, I'm surprised that Barry was able to release Thawne in time for him to reset the timeline. If Thawne hadn't have been captured, or Barry had just let his timeline set, in theory there would have been no Thawne. Since Barry was never the Flash, Thawne would never have to become his greatest enemy. So technically, if Barry reset the timeline, nobody would have known and Barry's life would have been perfect. Exactly what he wanted. I'm surprised that Barry didn't realize this and he just kind of let things go back to the way they were. I'm also surprised he didn't lose all his memories because he definitely should have. And at 4, the end of time. Last time I mentioned how Wally was able to race Black Flash to the end of time, causing death to have no meaning, thus destroying Black Flash, which didn't matter for long since later Barry Allen returned in the Flash Rebirth storyline, unknowingly becoming the new Black Flash, until Zoom took over the title after his corpse was raised in Blackest Night. But if you think about it, how did any of this actually start? Like, how does one run to the end of time and somehow survive it? Like, if death has no meaning, is that because nothing is alive in order to die? Because if Wally was at the end of time, seemingly that would give death a meaning, right? Or does being at the end of time make you like immortal? I'm unaware of the rules here. Because in my head, if he was at the end of time, there's no way he should have survived that. Like, how did he beat Black Flash? I mean, I know I mentioned the whole Black Flash thing last time, but specifically this time, how did he get to the end of time? How does time end? Great, now I'm in an existential spiral. Getting close to the end in number 3, Dominators. Dominators are a race of extraterrestrial beings from Swan Moon. They are conquerors intent on maintaining the status quo in the universe by any means necessary, and with the unpredictable metahumans being their prime targets on Earth, and the primary antagonists of the Invasion crossover event on the CW. 65 years after an incident in 1951, with the appearance of metahumans, especially Barry Allen, the Dominators returned to Earth, prefaced with a warning to earthly authorities that they meant no harm, though were in fact planning a war. 4 ships crash landed, and one of them was in Central City, spilling forth with Dominators. As they headed down towards Earth, the mothership followed them. At this time, the Dominators were also about finished with their super weapon that they had intended to use to wipe out all metahumans on Earth. They threatened to drop it unless Barry Allen had surrendered himself within 24 hours, which he refused, after everyone convinced him not to. The reason they wanted Barry, though, was because of his power and the creation of Flashpoint. Jackson Professor Stein, also known as Firestorm, did end up transmuting the bomb meant to kill all metahumans into water, but I'm surprised that any metahumans came out of this one intact. How can you touch a bomb that is meant to destroy you? I don't know. If it's poisonous to metahumans, I don't know how he was able to touch it. But ultimately, in at number 2, Nuclear Bomb. Barry, Vibe, Killer Frost, and Jesse Quick headed over to an Argus facility where a woman by the name of Veronica Dale intended to blow up Central City with a nuclear bomb. They ended up defeating her and her men, but failed to stop the detonation. Barry used this new ability where time is seemingly frozen around him completely after he realized that it was too late. Then he pointed out to Jesse, who was also moving in flash time with him, him that moving the bomb somewhere else would only speed up the reaction, and the idea of traveling back in time is not a choice after all the problems Barry had caused by creating FLASHPOINT, because you know the whole DOMINATORS thing too. They agreed that they couldn't stop the bomb, but that they also weren't enough to take everyone out of Central City. Barry then had the idea of calling Jay Garrick for help and sent Jesse to Earth 3 to get him. Everything they tried though failed, sending it to a dead Earth, freezing it, nothing. So Barry ended up trying to say goodbye to Iris, who instead told him to use the quark sphere that they had used to trick the Speed Force into thinking that he was still in there to fuse the atoms back together and prevent the detonation, which ended up working. This whole episode takes place within 5 seconds of real time and is probably the fastest Barry has ever moved, but it's still surprising how they managed to stop a nuclear bomb. It shouldn't have happened, I'm sorry. It's a good episode though. And finally, in number 1, Damian Wayne. Did you know that Damian Wayne has killed Wally West before? Well, in the past. As in, his present version traveled to the past to stop his heart. Essentially, this is all because of some time travel shenanigans. The Teen Titans and the Titans needed to stop a Speed Force empowered Deathstroke. To stop him, they needed to stop Wally from doing stuff in the future. So, Damian's first thought was, for some reason, to stop past Wally's heart for a couple seconds, long enough to alter the timeline, but not long enough to kill future Wally. This had the unintended consequence of giving past Wally a pacemaker, which ended up affecting the future Wally, who also now had to have this pacemaker, with Damian saying, quote, "The stone palm technique causes commotio cordis, a disruption of heart rhythm. He only has to die for a few seconds, long enough to disrupt the history of the Flash, so that basically Deathstroke wouldn't end up getting a speed." I don't know how that would work, especially if they brought him back after just a few seconds, but okay. This more or less screwed up his history and his heart, even though his heart started again. And this occurred within the pages of Teen Titans The Lazarus Contract, but it still shouldn't have happened. That's all the time we have for today, friends. Thank you all so much for watching. I have been in Shower Me, Connor Monroe, and I'll see you in another video.